Hello everybody, welcome to lecture 3. I've decided to do things a little bit differently this week, and in fact I think this is how we'll probably go for the rest of the unit. I've decided that rather than talk at you for the full hour on a Tuesday, I'm actually just going to reduce that to half an hour from 12 to 12:30, and I'll deliver this lecture earlier, so you've got a chance to have a look at it and think about it before we meet on a Tuesday, if you wish to engage in conversation. So that's through the Zoom meeting that's available on the Moodle site. So this week we're talking about research design. Now this is quite a complex lecture. I'm introducing some quite complex concepts. However, what I really want is, I'm introducing a lot of it because it's part of the online quiz. Some of the things are basically straight answers for some of those questions. So it's valuable for you to have a basic understanding of some of the terminology, but I don't need you to have a comprehensive understanding of everything to do with different types of experimental design and so forth. I'm giving you this information so you can proceed with confidence if you find yourself in a position where you need to learn more about this, just to give you some signposts so you can understand what it is that you're talking about. Okay, so in this lecture I'll define research design, I'll identify types of research design, and I'll explain experimental design, and there'll be some review questions which you guys can do on your own. The reading for this lecture is chapter 4, and it pretty closely covers it, so it's quite valuable for you to have a read. It gives you a bit more elaboration and detail. Okay, learning outcomes, I've just put them up there because that's what we do. This is aligned with the learning outcomes that we have for this unit. Okay, so thinking back to the 11 steps, I don't know how to actually close this Dr. Top. Oh, no. I don't know how to close that little thing up the top, so sorry if it's annoying you. But anyway, oh, there we go, it's gone. Nice. Okay, so from lecture 2, I went through the 11 steps of the different, the steps of marketing research. This lecture talks about step 4, which is determining the research design. Yep. That's it. Okay, so research design is the overall strategy you choose to integrate the different components of the study in a coherent and logical way to effectively address the research problem. It's really very wordy, but basically it's about thinking about how you're going to do this logically to answer your research problem. What research are you going to do? And this is about designing the research. It's a blueprint for the collection, measurement and analysis of data. It says here, note that your research problem determines the type of design you should use, not the other way around. Very important to make sure that you set your research problems and questions before you start moving into how you're going to go about doing things. There's a link there too you can have a look at. It's a writing guide for research designs from an American university, which I think is actually pretty useful. All right, okay, so there's 3 types of research design that the textbook talks about, and some in it's not completely comprehensive, but this is sort of the main ones. There's exploratory research, which is a lot less formal. It gives you background information. It could be like a pilot study or something like that. Define terms, clarify problems and hypotheses, establish research priorities. So it's sort of like the initial step to figure out whether you need research, and if you do, what the sort of things you might be thinking about your problems to be. It's usually some kind of like, for example, if you're thinking about doing a big survey on tourists in Cairns, which is the sort of stuff I do, you might go out and just talk to a few people in various locations who are tourists to get a feel for what they're saying before you design a pilot survey, and that's your exploratory research. It can be more formal than that, but that's kind of a lot of what it is. Okay, descriptive research is describing and measuring marketing phenomena, or any phenomena if you're thinking general research, and causal, to determine causality. So it's an if-then statement. It starts getting quite technical. So if we, in an experiment, change the temperature of the water, will the egg cook? There you go. if the water temperature is high, then the egg will cook. So you can start to find some scientific relationships between things that happen. And that also says it's an attempt to uncover what factor or factors cause some event. All right, so they're your 3 ones that we're going to talk about today. Okay, exploratory research methods. Okay, so secondary data analysis using existing data already available, and we'll talk more about secondary data next week. Experience surveys, so the key informant technique, which is where you might go and actually just have a long conversation with people who know what's going on in a community. You might, the lady who's on the front desk of the council might know a lot of what's going on with, complaints and so forth. Those sort of people. Lead user surveys. There's a user of a product or service that's on the leading edge of significant market trends. So they're often early adopters, people who are pushing out into the edge and trying new things, and they're using things that maybe other people haven't started using yet. So you can have a bit of a talk to them maybe about some of the issues and concerns they might have about a product, especially like beta testing people for computer programs. If you're trialing a computer program, you might release what they call a beta version of it, which is a sort of a no guarantees test version for people to try, and then they get that for free, and they get the excitement of actually having a new product to try, but at the same time they have to offer feedback as to what works and what doesn't. Case analysis, so considering a specific scenario through a case study. So a case study is usually, it's not always exploratory, but it can be. And focus groups, so meeting with small groups for discussion. Okay, descriptive research methods. So these are really standard kind of research questions: who, what, where, when, and how. There's cross-sectional ones where you take a basic cross-section of the whole population at one point in time. So it's like you want to know what everybody thinks in this one sample population of a certain thing at a certain time. Most surveys are a lot like that. But then there's also longitudinal studies. So that goes across a time frame. So for example, here in Cairns, we have a longitudinal study that's been going for 7 years, exit surveys for tourists leaving Cairns Airport. And what we can see over the period of time is whether people's incomes, as they're coming to Cairns, whether people's incomes are going up or down, whether we're getting more people from China than we used to. Those sort of questions we can actually find out over a period of time. And they're very, very valuable, but quite expensive and difficult to sustain for long periods. The AC Nielsen Household Consumer Panel is an ongoing survey that sort of tests basic perceptions of things, and you can have a click on that and have a look at what they do. There's continuous panels, so there's consumer purchase behaviour, brand switching studies, market tracking studies. These are all studies tracking different types of markets that are available for marketers to use. And then discontinuous panels. So omnibus panels, it's a wide variety of questions in one survey for a range of businesses. That's, slightly technical, but that sometimes lots of businesses come together to have an ongoing feedback for over a period of time of changing consumer patterns and so forth. Right, causal research methods, as I mentioned, they're basically if this, then that sort of ones. It's really important, and this isn't really discussed much, I don't think, in the textbook, but it's really important to remember that there's a difference between correlation and causation. And you can see the penguins here wondering if the film crews have brought on global warming or the global warming brought on the film crews. And the thing is they're observing is a correlation. There is a correlation. Both of those things are changing, but they don't know which one caused which one. So there is correlation, but there is causation. If there's global warming, then the film crews come. But the penguins might think the other way around, that the film crews are coming and bringing global warming. And I think that's a very important point to make, is that you've got to be really careful about how you read causational data, and there's lots of important conventions around causal data and research methods that you need to probably be aware of. So thinking about causal research methods, often you can use experiments to help identify both correlation and causation. An experiment, here's a very technical term again, manipulates an independent variable to see how it affects a dependent variable. So an independent variable is something we can change, a dependent variable is something that we can't, while also controlling the effects of additional extraneous variables. So identifying and understanding what those are. Right, so an independent variable, it's a variable that the researcher has control over and wishes to manipulate. Now there's a little diagram in the bottom corner and it shows sun. So we can control how much sun a plant gets. So we can see if the sun causes the plant to grow more or less. And so the independent variable is the sun. The dependent variable is the plant growth. That actually will continue growing at some rate or another. With or without us manipulating it. So it's a dependent variable, it's dependent on our independent variable. Okay, the extraneous variables are variables that may have some effect on a dependent variable yet are not independent variables. So that might be the soil, for example, although to be fair, we could probably affect the type of soil and so forth. But these things need to be controlled through proper research design. Okay, now look, seriously, you don't really need to know a lot about this stuff and we're not going to go into the massive details on it, but I'm introducing you to these concepts. So if you're particularly interested, you can read more about it in the textbook. And also, I think there might be a question in it, in the quiz about it. So O equals measurement or observation of a dependent variable. X equals manipulation or change or treatment of an independent variable. R is a random assignment of subjects to experimental and control groups. So that means that subjects go between what's called the experimental group, which is what you're going to do something to, and the control group, which is something you're not going to go to, so you can see whether things are changing anyway in the control group or whether it is in fact to do with your independent variable. And E is your experimental effect, the change in the dependent variable due to the independent variable. Okay, so that just shows you that there is in fact a change or there's not. And time is on the horizontal axis. So that's how you show these things. Now, look, the previous people who have lectured in this subject have always considered this important to put in, so I put it in for you, but I don't think you need to know much more than that. So there you go. All right, so true experimental design isolates the effects of the independent variable on the dependent variable while controlling for the effects of any extraneous variables. So like I said, the control group has no change in the independent variable and it identifies whether there are other variables that might be changing things or not. The experimental group is the group that's exposed to the independent variable. So that's the group that actually has the change affected on it. So that the control group does help you identify if there may be variables that you hadn't considered. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, look, we're not biologists, we're not psychologists, why is this important? But when you're thinking about rolling out a really significant product change, you want to be thinking really carefully about the true impacts and true variables of your your product going out to market. There's some really important things about experimenting with products and understanding price points and understanding changes. So you might say, for example, that the independent variable is a price, and if you change that price at some point, it's going to impact how much it's purchased. You can see that actually can have really important impacts on your business decision making when you're thinking about developing products and marketing them. Okay, quasi-experimental design doesn't properly control for the effects of extraneous variables on the dependent variable. So it's not quite as laboratory-like. And look, there's pre-test and post-test. So the pre-test is a measurement of the dependent variable taken prior to changing the independent variable, and then post-test is a measurement of the dependent variable after changing the independent variable. I've put that, it looks like it's supposed to be under quasi-experimental design. It actually applies to both types of experimental design. So the pre-test, post-test theory is essentially that you look at what it was and you look at what it is now, and you can see whether these things have changed. There's more, if you want someone to explain it maybe more articulately than me, have a look at that link there and see what we can do. Validity. Now this is really important because you can do all of this stuff, but you have to understand if it's actually valid. You have to understand if these changes that you're measuring are true or not, because you don't want to be recommending that people make decisions on things that are not actually valid. Because when you might do that for 100 people, it might turn out one way, but if you haven't got valid results, you applied that to 100,000 people, it's going to be a very costly error. So it's really important to understand about validity. Like I said, I don't need you to be able to calculate all these things. I just need you to understand that they exist, so you can think about them and use them as concepts later on. And we will talk a bit about validity when we're thinking about using SPSS. Okay, so an experiment is valid. It needs both internal and external validity. So internal validity is the extent to which the change in the dependent variable is actually due to the change in the independent variable and not to other factors, such as extraneous variables. Okay, so it's important that it is actually due to the independent variable. External validity is the extent that the relationship observed between the independent variable and the dependent variable during the experiment is generalizable to the real world. Okay, so you might have internal validity and you've taken a sample of 10, but to get external validity, you need to know that you've actually looked at the whole population. You know, a valid sample of the whole population, you might need 500 of those to be able to show that it's actually generalizable in a wider way. So they're the two. One's within the experiment and one is out and generalizable to the real world. Okay, types of experiments. So there's laboratory experiments and field experiments. It's pretty self-explanatory. The laboratory experiments are in a contrived artificial setting, so you can control as much as you possibly can, as many of the extraneous variables as you can. The field experiments are more in the natural setting. So that's where you actually go out and see how things are done. Just trying to think of a field experiment is, you know, where you might be looking, for example, in a supermarket to see where people look to purchase different types of rice. Are they always only looking at the middle shelf, or are they actually looking down enough? You know, we could walk someone into a much more controlled environment and ask them where they look, and they may look somewhere else. So there's a field versus a laboratory experiment. Both have really important valid reasons for existing. All right, test marketing. Geez. Experiment, study or test conducted in a field setting. All right, so that's part of the field experiments. It's used to test sales potential for new product or service, and it's to test variations in the marketing mix for a product or service. Okay, so, you know, you've probably seen test marketing before where they've tried cheese and Vegemite chips and they've put them out there just to see what happens. They might only put it out in one city or two, so they don't have to roll it out across the whole country or world. And then they just, you know, they see whether people are purchasing them, whether people are repeat purchasing them, and so forth. So there's 4 types of test marketing. There's the standard, controlled, electronic and simulated. Yeah, you can have a read of those. There's nothing very surprising in there. They're just different types. So the electronic one, for example, the panel of consumers have agreed to carry identification cards. So every time you purchase something, they can see whether you're purchasing the same things or differently, repeat purchasing and things like that. So yeah, anyway, I'll let you read those because they're not super important for you to understand, but it's good for you to know that they exist. Oh, and that's the end of that. So here's the review questions. Have a look. These are the sort of questions. The reason I'm introducing these to you all 3, I think, of these is because these are the sort of questions you might be seeing in the online quiz. If you've got any questions, please join the Zoom meeting between 12 and 12:30. If you've got any really pressing questions and you really can't join that Zoom meeting between 12 and 12:30 on a Tuesday, then feel free to send me an email. Thank you.